Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The Salma Montes case. Why did a young student pay with her life? Our today's story, widely publicized as the Salma Montes case, took place in Mexico just a few years ago. The victim was a young law school student who was guilty of breaking off her engagement to her fiancé, who abused her. For this, the 22-year-old girl paid for her life in the most brutal way, and her executioner, with the support of loved ones, was confident that he would escape punishment. In a wicked irony of fate, Salma studied at the faculty, specializing in crimes against women. Who is Salma Montes? Our current heroine was born in 1996, November 18th, in a small Mexican town, Delicias, located in the state of Chihuahua, in the northern part of the country. The full name given to her at birth is Salma Yajaira Montes Soto. She was the youngest of two children in the family and was raised with her older sister Karen. The girl's birth father, whose name was Gabriel, passed away from a heart attack when Salma was barely 4 years old, and her sister was 8 years old. Since then, their mother Soledad raised the children on her own. The woman never married again and devoted herself to her daughters, doing everything to ensure that they did not need anything. Salma grew up a kind, sociable, and responsive girl. She had many friends from an early age. She adored animals and always came to the aid of others at the first call. Those around her characterized her as a petite, smiling brunette with incredibly beautiful eyes and a kind soul. As a child, Salma, playing with her sister, fell off the swing and split her eyebrow, which left her a small scar in the form of a crescent moon, but it did not spoil her attractive appearance, and rather, even became a kind of highlight. In adolescence, the girl, like many of her peers, decided to make a few small tattoos, which, as it seemed, reflected her inner world and state of mind. Her mother, although she was a person of conservative views, did not object and prevent her younger daughter's self-expression. She did well in school, although she was not an excellent student. She dreamed of getting a higher education, but knew that her family has no money to pay for expensive university tuition, and therefore made every effort to get a scholarship and study for free. Although not without difficulty, but Salma succeeded, and she became a student at the prestigious National Autonomous University of Mexico. The girl entered the Faculty of Law, choosing a specialization, crimes against women. Roman with a butcher. In 2006, the 20-year-old student met a young man whose name was Kevin Gualberto Pilcaster. The guy was 5 years older than her. He worked as a cook in one of the local catering establishments and dreamed of a career as a restaurateur. It is noteworthy that the young man began his professional career as a butcher, cutting up cattle carcasses in a butcher shop owned by his family. Kevin was quite nice, good-looking, and courteous. He knew how to make a good impression, and he seemed to Salma to be a good guy. Between them began a friendly communication, which very quickly turned into a romantic relationship. 5-year age difference was not a serious obstacle, and about a year later the couple officially engaged. Members of the Pilcaster family gladly accepted Salma, despite the fact that her family was much more modest in terms of material wealth. They believed that the young beauty has a positive effect on Kevin, who next to her literally glowed with happiness. But there was another reason, which they preferred not to talk about. As it turned out, the guy had attacks of aggression, from which suffered all those who were unlucky to be at that moment near. However, after the engagement, as it seemed to everyone, he became a little more restrained and calm. But Soledad and Karen did not want to be related to the rich chosen Salma. They noticed a change in Salma's behavior, which caused them genuine concern. Since the beginning of their relationship with Kevin, she became withdrawn, often crying, closed in his room, and from the smiling and cheerful leader has not left a trace. At the same time, Salma desperately tried to convince her mother and sister that she was fine. In addition, her face and body were periodically bruised, which she carefully tried to hide, and their origin was not explained in any way, avoiding an answer. When Salma accepted a marriage proposal from her boyfriend, her loved ones were shocked and desperately tried to dissuade her from marrying a guy who abuses her. But the young student, despite everything, was in love with her chosen one, and naively believed that everything would change for the better. A scandalous breakup. Time passed, and Kevin became more and more irascible, aggressive, and intemperate. He was jealous of his passport literally to every pillar, forbade her to communicate with fellow students, and in general with any guys, and also demanded that Salma daily reported to him about where she was and with whom she saw. On this ground, the couple constantly quarreled, and the young man often put his fists into action. At the end of March 2019, after another major quarrel, which ended in manhandling, Salma broke off the engagement just a couple of months before the planned wedding. For her fiancé, it turned out to be a terrible blow, but not because he loved the girl, was very worried about it and wanted to fix everything, but because he took the deed of the chosen one as a personal insult. First time, Kevin tried to return the bride, but he did it in an ultimatum and orderly form. When he realized that she did not want to see him anymore, he suddenly changed tactics. He again became courteous and polite, as at the beginning of their relationship, offered the former lover to remain friends and continue to communicate. A couple of weeks after the breakup, the young people finally calmly talked and seemed to have figured everything out. Salma at the time was actively preparing for the defense of the diploma, had an internship, and was too busy studying, and therefore about the conflict with her former fiancé and broken engagement almost did not think. When on May 31st, Salma unexpectedly called Kevin and proposed to meet, she did not think it strange or suspicious, and she agreed. They agreed to see each other that evening in the parking lot outside the local Natural History Museum on the northeast side of town. The guy worked near the place and often left his car there. After school, Salma was given a ride to the building by a close friend of hers named Violet. Since it was Friday night, they said goodbye until Monday, agreeing to go to the library together that day to study. There was a Ford Transit van in the parking lot, which belonged to Kevin's parents and which he himself used as his work vehicle. The young man was supposed to show up any minute, so Salma headed for the car while her friend went home. Salma has not been seen alive since. Disappearance of a student. When Salma did not return home in the evening, her mother and sister sounded the alarm. She always warned her loved ones if she was going to stay out late or spend the night at a friend's house. About the planned meeting with Kevin, Soledad and Karen did not even guess, because Salma, not wanting to upset them, hid it from them. The student's cell phone was turned off, and after several hours of unsuccessful attempts to reach her, her mother and sister began to call her friends, but they could not help. When the relatives contacted Violet, she said that Salma was going to meet her ex-fiancé, and she drove her to the meeting. At this point, the women realized that something terrible had happened, and it was time to sound the alarm. They immediately, right in the middle of the night, went to the police station, where they reported the disappearance of Salma, as well as their terrible guesses about what might have happened. Law enforcers took the statement of the concerned women seriously and quickly began searching for the missing student. The first thing was questioned Violet, who last saw Salma. She confirmed that she took her friend to meet her ex-fiancé, and they said goodbye in the parking lot, and a couple of hours later, Salma Montez's phone was turned off and unavailable. Kevin, who was visited by the police in the morning, said he saw his ex-fiancé in the parking lot. They talked for a while and went their separate ways. It was obvious that the guy was not telling us something, but he had nothing to show for it. Less than 24 hours had passed since Salma's disappearance, and there was still hope that she would soon turn up alive and unharmed, and there were no good reasons for detention, searches, and interrogations, so the investigators limited themselves to talking outside the station and collecting testimony. Salma's friends, fellow students, and relatives took an active part in the search for her. They pasted flyers with her photos around the city, created posts on social networks, through which they asked to share any relevant information about Salma's whereabouts. The missing person was described as a petite, skinny brunette with light skin and brown eyes. Among the special features mentioned were her tattoos, 3 hearts on her stomach and musical notes on her right arm, as well as a small scar above her eyebrow. She was carrying a cloth backpack with textbooks, notes, and a student ID card, which she always carried with her. A grisly find on the banks of the canal. On June 7, 2019, A badly disfigured and decomposed human body was found on the bank of a canal, miles away from the interstate highway, the appearance of which was literally shocking. The hands were missing. The skin had been stripped off in places, the hair had been burned off, and the face had been mutilated beyond recognition. In addition, all teeth had been removed, and no personal belongings or clothing could be found. According to preliminary reports, the cause of death was a deep wound in the neck inflicted by the precise blow of a sharp knife. As a result of this action, the carotid artery was damaged, and the girl literally bled to death in a couple of minutes, and all other injuries were inflicted posthumously. Obviously, the perpetrator did everything possible to make the body unrecognizable, either by fingerprints, dental records, or any special features or external data. Experts only agreed that it was a young girl aged 25 years old, and it was immediately suggested that the body belongs to Salma Montes, who disappeared a week ago and whose story was actively replicated in the press. The mother and sister of the girl were invited to the identification, but they could not recognize their relative in the disfigured corpse. The women simply refused to believe that someone could have treated the kind-hearted and sympathetic Salma so cruelly. In order to unambiguously identify the identity of the victim, required an expensive DNA examination. However, the Montes family had no money for such research, so the test was conducted by a state laboratory, whose equipment left much to be desired, and the probability of error or inaccuracy was quite high. Unfortunately, the results of the examination confirmed that the mutilated body found did indeed belong to the missing student. However, the grief-stricken relatives of the girl still refused to believe it, and announced on social networks to raise funds for a second examination in a private laboratory with more accurate and modern equipment. Hundreds of concerned people responded to their request, and the necessary amount of money was collected quickly enough, but, alas, the retest only confirmed the results of the previous one. It was Salma, the only suspect. Relatives and close friends of the deceased in one voice claimed that she had no enemies or ill-wishers, but at the same time, almost all mentioned her troubled relationship with Kevin Pilcaster, with whom she broke off her engagement about a month before her disappearance. Salma's mother and sister claimed that her ex-fiancé abused and beat her, which is why she decided to break up with him. It would seem that this guy should have been the main, if not the only, suspect from the beginning. But until the body was identified, he remained at large and his house, car, and personal belongings were not searched, which gave him a great opportunity to get rid of the evidence. Only 2 weeks after Salma's disappearance, and a week after the discovery of her body, Kevin was taken into custody on charges of kidnapping and brutalizing his former fiancée. The young man himself categorically denied his guilt, although he agreed to cooperate with the investigation. However, his testimony has largely changed. The new version and found evidence. In the opinion of forensic experts, an experienced butcher or surgeon worked on the body of the girl. The hands were separated from the body with precise cuts on the joints, which spoke of a good knowledge of anatomy. The skin was also expertly and skillfully removed. As it turned out, the perpetrator removed it in places where there were tattoos, as well as noticeable birthmarks in order to eliminate the possibility of identifying the body by them. Since Kevin had worked as a butcher in the past and had extensive experience in cutting carcasses, the prosecution tried to cling to this thread. But the defendant's lawyers insisted that it was a mere coincidence, and this circumstance could not be used in court as evidence of their client's involvement in the case. According to the new version, told by Pilcaster after his arrest, that evening they actually met with his ex-fiancée in a parking lot near his work. They were just talking when suddenly another guy approached them, who, according to Kevin, was Salma's new boyfriend. Allegedly, this guy was jealous of the girl's former fiancé and punched her in the face with a swing. But the defendant stood up for Salma. He told her to take shelter in his van, and he himself decided to deal with the offender in a manly manner. However, the fight had barely started when Salma jumped out of the van and begged Kevin not to hurt her boyfriend. After that, Salma and the stranger left, and Pilcaster went home. The defendant's parents and grandmother, who were called as witnesses, claimed that he returned home at midnight, changed his clothes, and went out with his new girlfriend named Consuela. Soon, the girl herself showed up at the station to confirm Kevin's alibi, saying that on that fateful night he was with her and could not have committed the crime, and then cover his tracks. The van in which the suspect was traveling was seized, and inside the vehicle was found washed-up traces of blood belonging to the deceased. In response, the young man claimed that Salma had gotten a nosebleed after a jealous boyfriend punched her, and she probably left a trail when she hid in the van while the men worked things out. However, according to Salma's family and friends, no new boyfriend has appeared for her since her breakup with her fiancé. She was completely absorbed in her studies, wrote a diploma, and preparing for his defense. By the way, to find this mysterious boyfriend, which Kevin could not even thickly describe, and failed, most likely because he made him up. Despite the new details and Consuela, who came out of nowhere to confirm the alibi of the accused, the whole story looked very strange and unreliable. Nevertheless, the court found that the evidence presented by the prosecution was insufficient to convict. Pilcaster was acquitted and released from the courtroom in August 2019. Escape from the city. Almost immediately after his release, the young man hurriedly left his hometown, and for about 6 months did not give any news of himself at all. This caused a storm of indignation among the relatives of the murdered girl because the case was not closed. The investigation continued, and the only suspect was simply released like this. In fact, letting him escape. As this unprecedentedly brutal case became publicized, and its details were covered in the press for about 2 months, many residents of the city decided to express their support for the Montes family. People gathered at spontaneous rallies, demanding to find Kevin and to reopen the case against him, because he was clearly not telling something, and the story he told was not believable. Salma's family and the activists who helped them succeeded in getting the investigation reopened, and a second search of the suspect's home revealed a hidden cache in the wall containing Kevin's bloody clothes and a large kitchen knife, which he had probably used to kill and then partially cut up his victim. Most likely, he had not had time or was afraid to dispose of this evidence, believing that no one would find it in the stash. At almost the same time, Pilcaster, apparently following the advice of his lawyers, decided to make himself known and go on the attack. He didn't just make himself known, he filed a lawsuit against the Montes family, accusing them of slander, organizing his harassment, and tampering with evidence. The man said he was forced to leave town because he feared for his life because of the harassment organized by Soledad and Karen. In his opinion, the women had turned the entire town against him, and he was simply afraid of being lynched. As evidence, Kevin provided a mass of anonymous, threatening messages that he received on a daily basis, all because his personal information, including his phone number and email address, was published on the internet, as he assumed it was done by relatives of his ex-fiancée. He also claimed that he was being guarded under the house by unknown people who threatened to do away with him and his family. Following the gruesome discovery at the Pilcaster home, Kevin has once again become the prime suspect in the murder case and has once again been taken into custody. At the same time, the man and his lawyers insisted that the evidence was planted on him and also accused the Attorney General of collusion with the Montes family and the deliberate concealment of part of the CCTV footage, which allegedly could prove the innocence of the defendant and confirm his alibi. However, no such recordings were found because they simply did not exist. A new investigation and a protracted trial. Before Kevin could be taken back into custody, it was necessary to overturn his previous acquittal. This process was somewhat protracted because the judge did not want to admit his mistake and insisted that his decision was correct and only right. However, after several sessions, the verdict was overturned, after which a new case was started, taking into account the discovered evidence. In this regard, Kevin's parents and grandmother decided to organize a real press conference, during which, answering questions from journalists, called their family members victims of the machinations of Soledad and Karen Montes. According to them, these women from the beginning were against the relationship between Kevin and Salma, while the Pilcasters loved Salma with all their hearts and already considered her a member of their family. They also claimed that they were literally crushed by the news of the death of the failed daughter-in-law, and soon they were in for another shock when their son was accused of Salma's murder. The suspect himself in the interrogation did not hide the fact that they had a difficult relationship with the former lover and even confirmed that, at times, raised his hand on her. He justified his actions by the fact that Salma, allegedly, he cheated and he had the right to punish her. He also did not hide that he was annoyed when Salma broke off the engagement, which she, in his opinion, had no right to do because it offended him as a man. A new trial did not begin until June 2020. This time, Kevin was charged with kidnapping and aggravated brutal murder motivated by gender-based hate. In fact, he himself led the investigation to this conclusion, constantly repeating, "A woman had no right to act and speak like that." The collected evidence, including the bloody clothes and the knife, which was recognized as the murder weapon, as well as the testimony of witnesses, was enough to convict. And the story previously told by Kevin about Salma's new boyfriend, who, in his opinion, and was the real culprit, simply fell apart because there was no other guy in the parking lot or in the life of Salma. However, the prosecution requested time to complete the investigation, and the court agreed to grant the request. In this regard, it was decided to send the defendant for 6 months of pretrial detention in a maximum security prison. But due to the coronavirus pandemic that swept the world, the investigation was delayed, and court hearings were repeatedly postponed. So Kevin's 6-month pretrial detention dragged on for almost 2 years. A fair sentence. It wasn't until May 2023, on the eve of the 4th anniversary of the crime, that a new hearing was held, at which the prosecution presented all the evidence it had managed to uncover in the meantime. In court, several witnesses testified to the fact that Pilcaster abused his fiancée, beat her, and sought to control her every move, depriving her of any freedom. He treated her like a thing that belonged only to him and did not accept the fact that she chose to leave him. On August 16, 2023, Kevin was found guilty of aggravated murder as well as cruelty to the body. As for the kidnapping, this point of the charge, according to the judge, was not proven, because Salma herself came to meet with her ex-fiancé, and herself could get into his car. Nevertheless, the evidence presented in the courtroom was enough to send a young man to prison for life. More precisely, he was sentenced to 70 years in prison. But if we take into account that at that time the defendant was 32 years old, it is fair to say that such a sentence became for him a life sentence. In addition, Kevin was required to pay the Montes family about $45,000 as moral compensation. Salma's mother and sister later stated that they were quite satisfied with the verdict, although Pilcaster never admitted his guilt, did not repent, and did not explain the motives for his terrible and inhumane act. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel and also don't forget to click the bell. There are many shocking stories ahead.